I've had a couple of requests for this song. This is a song that I wrote on the 10th anniversary of Bobby Sands' death and hunger strike. So I'd like to do it in memory of him and of all the hunger strikers. So always spare a wee thought for them anytime you're passing about the road. It's called Song for Marcella.
Well, firstly, I'm Bik McFarlane, originally from Ardown in North Belfast, and grew up there. Went to school there, got involved in the local GAA club there, and ended up being away studying in a seminary in North Wales around the time of the pogroms in '69, and had been home during the course of that there, and got involved in trying to help to defend the area against the onslaught from the loyalists, the Peace Specialists and the RUC. And in the aftermath of that, had gone back to college and returned in the summer of 1970, and slowly but surely got involved in the conflict. Well, at the time that we were sentenced, we were in the cages with political status, where you had control of your own day, did your own education, recreation, etc., had your visits and parcels, wore your own clothes, had your own command structures. But a number of us were continually trying to escape, cutting fences, people swapped on visits, tried to swap on visits, a couple of guys took over the priest on a Sunday morning and a successful escape. But what we were doing was continually digging tunnels and all the rest of it. But three of us, Larry Marley, Pat McGill, and myself, were in cage 12, and on one particular occasion, after so many unsuccessful tunnels, etc., on one occasion we dressed up as guards, like trades crews, the ones that did the mechanical work around the camp, cut a hole in the fence, had makeshift tally discs that got you internal movement from one phase to another, and our idea was to get the whole way down to the trades area. However, what happened was we got caught at a security check where they required photographic ID, and we got caught there and immediately put into an isolation block, which is called the boards. Now, they kept us in our own gear and gave us our parcels, and nothing physical happened to us. I was actually sort of curious about that, because normally anybody caught trying to escape got a fairly good battering, and none of that happened. A bit of aggressive language in it, but there was no harsh issue. And it was there I came to meet the first blanket men who were coming in out of the boards. But they kept us there just under 2 weeks, about 11 or 12 days. And then the governor, who was in charge of the protesting blocks, decided to let us know we were being transferred to the H blocks. And when we protested and says, no, we expect to go back to where we came from, we're political prisoners. And he informed us that the NIO had withdrawn our political status. And it was actually funny, because once they moved us to H3, the OC told us put in what they called a board form and request return under political status regime because you qualify. And when the answer came back and the governor opened my cell door, he was sort of laughing, not at me, but in a way. And he said, you're not going to believe this. I says, what? He says, I have to read this out to you and then I have to present it to you. And it says, and I'm just paraphrasing here, it says that due to the fact that you were not satisfied with the accommodation provided by Her Majesty's Prison Service in the compounds of Maze, blah, 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 we are duty bound to offer you alternative accommodation. So you've now been transferred to H Block 3. And I just burst out laughing. And he says to me, you couldn't make that up, could you? And I said, no, that's it. So we ended up straight on to the blanket protest. Well, the H Block protest to retain political status commenced, I suppose, in the aftermath of March the 1st, 76, when political status was withdrawn. criminalisation was applied to everybody who were prisoners involved in the conflict. So they were robbing you of your political identity, of your political credentials, and of your political status. And the first prisoner in court after that was in September of that year, and it was Heather Nugent, and he refused to wear a criminal uniform and do forced labour and demanded a return of political status. And that commenced the protest. It was harsh, it was brutal. He was kept in a cell by himself, absolutely no facilities whatsoever, no clothes. So he had to wear a blanket, and hence the blanket protest. And as it progressed right through to the time that we had arrived down, which was just after Easter 1978, it had been ongoing for just under 2 years. And the numbers had built up around that time. There were prisoners in H blocks 3, 4 and 5. And I'm assuming there were up around a couple of hundred prisoners on protest at that stage when we arrived in. And they had just embarked around the Easter period. We arrived in the second week of April. Easter had been in March that year, but around the Easter period, the protest escalated into a no-wash protest, and cells were filthy, rotten food in the corners, and the brutality was pretty harsh at that period.
Doesn't seem quite so long ago.
Yeah, well, throughout the days of protest, numbers had increased as people were coming in, brutality had increased. And a number of us were transferred in January 79. 30 of us were transferred to H Block 6 one week. We thought we were going to get hammered because most of the ones who were transferred would have been leadership in the prison. People like the Dark, Bobby Sands, Joe Barnes, people like that, all transferred up. And a number of us who didn't. I didn't hold any positions in the H Blocks. A few of us didn't. I mean, Larry Marley, Pat McGill, were all transferred up. All had held positions of some description. But it transpired that while it was harsh and you were isolated, it wasn't as bad as what was happening in H3 and H4. H5 wasn't as, it was bad, but it wasn't as severe as 3 and 4. And the reports coming up to us were dire. What happened was we had broached the idea in the middle of 79 about embarking on a hunger strike later that year. Cardinal O'Fee, through Father Alec Reid, who was prison chaplain at the time and was more or less an emissary for the Cardinal, had encouraged us to defer hunger strike action because it would coincide with a papal visit to Drogheda that year in October, whereby if we had started hunger strike in September, crisis period October, it would be a major embarrassment to the papacy and to the Catholic Church in Ireland. So we deferred action while Cardinal O'Fee and Bishop Edward Daly embarked upon a campaign of lobbying Maggie Thatcher and the British government to introduce some measures in the H blocks or during the course of that protest that would alleviate the situation. What actually happened was, and I think everybody's aware of it, that Maggie Thatcher led them on a merry dance for about at least 6 months or more, right through the latter part of 1979, right through into the middle of 1980. And one of the breaking factors on it was that Cardinal O'Fee cut short a visit to Rome to come home and welcome the news that Maggie Thatcher had put out a statement that prisoners would be given their own clothing. That would have been a major breaker and a potential for a resolution. Only to be told on his arrival home in Ireland when he welcomed the news that Maggie Thatcher says, "Oh, I didn't actually say that. What I said was prisoners would be allocated clothing of a civilian type or civilian nature, which was a uniform by another name." So he took umbrage about it and criticised them, and that was the minute that we decided, okay, we'll announce that we need to embark on a hunger strike because there was no other way out of the situation. So word was sent around all the blocks telling people to prepare that hunger strike action was coming up, and we asked for volunteers, anybody who felt that they would be capable and that people needed to understand, the political ramifications of what we were embarking on. And I would normally point out to people who have asked me over the years, how come a protest lasted from September 76 until October 81 with 10 people down on hunger strike. And quite frankly, because the British had chosen the H blocks as a battleground to defeat the Republican struggle, again, the political ramifications of success or failure were massive, not only to us, but also to the Brits. And that's why it was a highly politically charged atmosphere and situation that, in a sense, nobody could put the hands up and say we surrender. There had to be a head-on collision that would bring it to a negotiated, agreed way out of the situation. So we received bucket loads, scores of people volunteered for the hunger strike in 1980. It was to be led by the Dark, Brendan Hughes, and we chose to use 7 people, which would be like geographical spread around the 6 counties, plus Sean McKenna would have been the overlapping factor, South Armagh, County Louth, that into the Free State area. And in that sense there, it would give, first of all, prominent people from those areas who everybody knew, who had good credentials, a focus for support, and it was a geographical spread. So we began the hunger strike on October 27, 1980, and it went apace. Bobby Sands had taken over as OC. I, at that stage, was doing PRO, which was just more or less organising letter writing campaigns by prisoners out to dignitaries, politicians, academics, film stars. People wrote to Jane Fonda, and she replied. People like that there. The Dean of St. Paul's put one of the columns on display in the display area in St. Paul's Cathedral in London. So we were reaching out to people, and the Relatives Actions Committees, which had been formed in '76, had moved into the H Block Armagh Committee, and the massive amount of support demonstrations was fed into us. So we were aware that there was support both nationally and internationally. Now the hunger strike went through the period right through to coming up to Christmas in 1980. There had been an avenue of background, not negotiations as such, but background contact. And there was a priest from the Redemptorist community from Dublin was brought in to act as like a go-between, not as a negotiator, but just as a go-between. And he came to visit us in the blocks. The Brits refused to allow a joint visit with Bobby Sands and me, because Bobby Sands had wanted me up on these visits with him. And what was happening was that we were just looking at potential ways of getting out of this, what would resolve the issue. And coming up to the 18th, 19th of December, Sean McKenna was weakening, and there was a clear indication that there was a document on its way that we could read into. It would then need, obviously, officials from the Brits, NIO officials, civil servants or whatever, to come in and spell out precisely what within the document they would yield or wouldn't. Now, within the document, there was a 30-page document that did arrive in. However, Sean McKenna had gone into a coma and was transferred to the military hospital in Musgrave while we were in the process of waiting to read through a document. What happened was the boys moved to save his life, and the document arrived about an hour later. And I remember saying to Bobby Sands, who had been up at the hospital and back again, he got called out of his cell later that evening, and the priest had met somebody at the airport and handed over the documents, and etc., etc., etc. And due to one thing and another, Sean McKenna had been transferred. However, in the aftermath of this, while you could read into the document as favourably as you want to, you could also read into it in as pessimistic a way as you wanted. And the Brits chose not to implement the spirit of what had been going on, that we can find a way out of this without anybody getting egg on their face. They decided to screw us to the ground. And that's what happened. So when we had told our people, I'd say, look, part and parcel of this will be access to your own clothing and just send them up in the Christmas parcels. The Brits refused to let the Christmas parcels in. They refused to let our own clothing in, even to be held in reception, just refused. And we knew that they were really going to nail us. So over the Christmas period, we had a lengthy debate in terms of what the course of action was. And it became quite clear that, we had offered to come out of the cells and paint the cells, decorate it, look after the food distribution. We were never opposed to doing that anyway. And that we would look after, clean up the wings and get the furniture in it, etc., etc., etc. And as a demonstration of this, we selected 2 wings, one in H3 and one in H5, where we would go out, get washed, get shaved, get a haircut, get furniture into the cells, and demonstrate that we were prepared to move positively to try and bring a resolution to this here. And we were in touch with the leadership outside, who had been, from the start of the first hunger strike, totally and absolutely opposed to hunger strike action for a variety of reasons. One of the key reasons is that prisoners in the H blocks, protesting prisoners, were by nature of the conflict propelled to the forefront in the cold face of struggle, which meant that there was a massive focus on what happened in the prisons in terms of progressive measures for the struggle. And in essence, you can't really have that if you're involved in a revolutionary struggle, that prisoners are going to determine how fast or not you move. And so the integrity and the credentials of the Republican struggle were riding on the backs of prisoners. Shouldn't be, but that's the way it was. So the Army Council had been totally opposed to it. And again, when we looked at the situation we were in after Christmas, we were arguing again with them, and they were sort of, look, you need to be seriously considering your position here. You need to explore a variety of measures to try and get out of this. And it ended up that we asked outside, after exploring a few measures that I've outlined there, we said to them, look, we can't go any further short of putting the gear on a surrender, and there's no way we can get out of this. Please offer us an alternative, and we'll certainly consider that. In the meantime, Bobby Sands had a meeting with the number 1 governor in the H blocks, Stanley Hilditch. And at this meeting, this was just the straw that broke the camel's back, I suppose, in terms of our decision making, was that Hilditch said to him, Sands, this is the crack. See until your men come out of those cells, put on that uniform, and obeyed by the directions of my prison officers and not your IRA colleagues. Only then will you be getting moving out of these cells. And that was it. So we then come back in, found ourselves in exactly the same position that we were in the previous year, prior to the hunger strike, and argued without saying that the second hunger strike would have to take place.
Last time that I saw you, ain't it funny how the memories grow? Seems they always fold around you, trying to break you in a living hell, but they couldn't find a way, so they killed you in an H-block cell.
Well, we spoke about this earlier. This is the small crystal set, and there's the earpiece coming out, which is tucked neatly inside it. This is like a small medicine capsule, a medicine bottle for keeping tablets or something in. So it's just cut off. The insert is in the inside of it, and if you pull off the lid like that, you can successfully pull this out to well over 1 metre long, maybe a couple of metres long in terms of length. And behind that, you can see there's a small wire which attaches to the metal frame, and you can actually twist the wee yoke around at the bottom to get your channel. And these were wrapped up and put in packages that were smuggled. They were called a barge, which the Irish word for parcel. So what you would do is that would be totally and absolutely all sealed in, and that would be inserted inside your body, small enough, a package about that size, that would be in, well sealed up. And you might have cigarettes, room for cigarette papers along with it, so you would insert that inside your body, and that's how that would be kept. This was crucial, as we said earlier, for communications purposes in terms of listening to all the news bulletins throughout the entire process. There's a funny story about this, and the fact that it was crucial was that I remember one day during the hunger strikes, Bobby Sands was actually in a prison hospital, and I wanted to get the news at 1 o'clock, but I was writing comms and I hadn't time to remove this and set it up. So I shouted over to Tomboy Loudon on the other side of the block, who also had one. And I shouted over to Tomboy, "Well, you on?" "Yes, what is it?" I says, "Newark, can you get the news?" "Yeah, no problem." Tomboy had just been out to the toilet, forgot that he had this inserted inside him. And the next thing I heard was a scream from the cell and his cellmate laughing. And I says, "What's the matter?" He says, "The radio's in Greencastle. It's going down the tubes." And I went ballistic, right? So the way he said it was, "Ta Maggie Taggart is in Greencastle. Maggie Taggart is in Greencastle." And the reason we called this Maggie Taggart was that in the news bulletins at the time, I think one of the key education spokespersons, one of the key news readers at the time, or one of the correspondents, was a woman called Maggie Taggart. And we used pseudonyms for radio, so we just called it Maggie Taggart, and everybody knew that Maggie Taggart was the radio. But the funny aspect was Tomboy totally forgot and went to the toilet and came back, and Maggie Taggart disappeared en route to Greencastle. This is the lock from one of the cell doors. It's very, very heavy, and you can really feel the weight in that there. And the key will be turned. This is a slightly different one that was on the wings that we were in. This might be from one of the other parts of the prison, but heavy duty metal, the brass insert for the key, and you turn it and you click it. That's a lock. You open it, but this sound, the sound of that clanging there that you heard, once you hear that, that struck a bit of fear into you, because the first thing you would hear when you heard that was "burn the air," which is the words for the screw is on the air. And when you heard that opening and it started door after door, you knew you were on a wing shift. And a wing shift could be a very, very hairy experience where you could get battered across from one wing to another. So that also signalled that. There was a lot of times at night when night guard were on, they would come around and rattle that. And if you heard it during the course of the night, it would have wakened you up. And they did it every time they did a check. They went round at 1 o'clock in the morning. Some of them did it every night.
But we're stronger now. You showed us how freedom's fight can be won if we all stand as one.